But you jump to the Rising Star Award of this year, they're all women. I don't just believe we should be giving token gesture spots just because we are women. I'm scratching my head going, okay, well, I'm one of the 30% of people that does listen to female or mixed gender artists, but there's a big chunk of the world that isn't. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Single Girl's Guide to Life, your weekly guide for single millennials that are trying to navigate dating, relationships, living on your own, and all things single life, and particularly girl life, single girl life. And with that, because of the age we are, it means that there are topical things that come up, particularly around feminism. And that is what I want to wade into today, because something's come to my attention that I've waded in on a little bit on social media, but I wanted to take further and make a full, longer form piece about understanding the situation about the all-male nominations for the category of Music Artist of the Year award for the Brits. People are up in arms over the fact that there has not been a female nomination for this year's Brit Awards for that category. Now, my instant response is to not panic, not push the panic button that this is a problem. In general, I stand for feminism, and by feminism, I understand that to be looking for the equality between men and women. But that doesn't mean, particularly with award ceremonies to me, that we should have these quoted numbers for any category, whether you're looking at gender, race, sexuality, if you really wanted to even that out as well. Any minority doesn't need to be given these boxes to tick in terms of awards. I think there are other scenarios where that's really valuable in terms of opportunity, but with the Brit Awards, when I first saw the headline, I firstly was shocked. Let's not beat around the bush. I'm a big Taylor Swift fan. I only read the headline, and I don't even think I took the headline in properly, but I just saw all male nominations, and I thought, here we go. So I read it, and I was like, where is Taylor Swift? And I swiftly, pun intended, remember that this was the Brits. So I was like, oh, she's been noted in the International Artist of the Year award. That's fine. Beyonce's there as well. So there's a few females going on there. Okay, let's take a little look at this list. So we've got Harry Styles, Stormzy, and George Ezra. Okay, I really only personally see Harry Styles' success. I knew Stormzy had an album out, but I didn't know it had done that well, if it had done that well. And then there was George Ezra, which, I mean, Green Green Grass was a great song, I think, but I didn't really know what much they'd been up to, you know? I was like, okay, come see, come sa, we'll see. But, okay, in the list, at least I know the name. Then there was Fred again. I was like, okay, I've heard of them. That's cool. Don't know their songs, per se. And then the fifth nomination was Central C. Now, I say that name now with confidence because I've looked it up. But prior to that, I was like, who is that? And I kind of disregarded the name for a little bit. But upon kind of reviewing, yeah, it turned out that I actually did know quite a few songs. And therefore I was like, okay, so they're fairly up and coming. They've obviously had some big numbers when I'm looking at this. So let me take some look at the history of the Brits. So this genderless category, which is intended for inclusivity so that non-binary people can be included. We don't have to have some separate category in that way. Last year is the only other year that it happened, and there I falsely reported, but now correctly can report that it was 3 men and 2 women because I read one of the names wrong. So in that year, we weren't too fussed. And so I thought, okay, well, is there a real skew towards men? Now, in general, I'm understanding that the Brits has been evolving and there has been an issue with representation of women in general. If you look back at the early days of the Brits, the categories are male-dominated overall and wholeheartedly, and there isn't a consideration for females. When I look at this year's Brit Awards, okay, yeah, that category is really male-dominant. That's obvious to see. But you jump to the Rising Star Award of this year, and of the 3 that you have for that award nominated, they're all women. And I don't hear the same cry going on, and I realise that men are not a minority group, or the way that that oppression has occurred. But I do believe in equality, and if we're going to talk about a group then that is missing out on the Artist of the Year award, then I want to talk too, alongside that, about the Rising Star category, because when you look back at the Rising Star category, which has no gender associated with it, when you look further back, the last 5-6 years has seen quite a number of female-only years, and even then, when you look at the years that do have a male candidate in there, it's still generally skewed towards women. So it does beg the question, if we've got so many good artists going through the system and getting these early riser nominations and then winning them in some cases, what's happening in between in terms of them not being then able to make it Artist of the Year? And last year's Artist of the Year, just to be clear, was Adele. That was the only other name that I came up with that was like, oh, who's British that might be able to do this? Adele. But I was like, no, the album came out in the wrong year. So I wanted to go down a few avenues because I needed to understand, or try to start understanding, what was really the problem. And this is the issue with jumping on one thing that's happened. And also, I don't just believe we should be giving token gesture spots within awards just because we are women and there should be a place for that. I prefer inclusivity, keeping the standard up and making sure that we work towards reaching that standard over time. I don't know enough stats. I'm not a music mogul expert, but I'm aware that there are female artists out there. When I asked people, who do you think should have made this list? People came up with some names like Ray, Charlie XCX, Kat Burns. There were a few. Admittedly, I looked at all of those names and went, I maybe have heard of a couple and I'll need to look up the rest. But I'm not convinced they're on the level that a number of these people are. If anywhere in my head, mentally before I checked, they were kind of probably going to compare to Central C. And now I've seen Central C's success and checked it, I'm like, oh, no, still maybe not. So I went back to try and verify what these people were saying. Now, listen to the Charlie XCX album. Great album. I have a very, actually, female-dominant list. I make a list every year. It's called Chantel's Insert Year Playlist. So I've already got my 2023 playlist going. Predominantly, when I look down the list, it's fairly female, thanks to Taylor Swift, Maisie Peters, Griff. Quite a lot of them all the time. Becky Hill. So I'm surprised, actually, that because I use Enhance to help me find new music, that I hadn't really been introduced to Charlie XCX. Because one, it's a banging album. And two, why not for someone that's listening to stuff that would fit that, especially her style as well. Maisie Peters and that don't match her, but the other music I listen to does. So, bit questionable in that sense. But ultimately, I couldn't look at any of those and think that that was wonderful. But what I did decide to do was go, well, that's just my playlist. Like, how many of us actually listen to female artists? Like, how did the charts look last year? What were the 1,000 people on the Brits panel thinking when they were making their votes? So there are 1,000 people on this panel. It is not decided by a little group of 5 people that got together and could have sat there and gone, well, let's leave all the women out this year. I just don't think they've done enough. 1,000 people is the way that we try to negate biases so that it's not super skewed. Now, I don't know who these 1,000 were. I know one of the female ones has come out and written an article and said, I'm so shocked that we haven't voted a woman in. But I just think sometimes where it's not yet a significant pattern, we can pause for a moment and look at why this has happened. So I took the data I could get hold of and the access I had to stuff. And I went, okay, Spotify's UK 2022 list of the year. Now, the dates don't quite work because of the cut-off of the Brits, but it gives us a good idea of what last year looked like and how much we stream songs on Spotify. Now, Spotify won't be the only streaming platform, but it's going to have a general representation. Well, I'm scrolling through this list and I'm going, there's not a female artist for a while anyway. And then one of the first female British artists I come to is Dua Lipa with Elton John. Don't even know if that song is eligible to be entered. It's also a collab. Don't know how that works. It's not there. Then we hit the Adele section. I'm like, okay, well, we thought that, but again, that's from the year before, so can't be counted. And I'm scrolling. I'm seeing Beyonce. I'm seeing Taylor Swift. I'm seeing Camila Cabello. So female representation is to some degree there, but it's American. And then right at the end, Kat Burns, which is one of the names that came up. She had the song on TikTok. That's the only reason I know it. And maybe I've heard it a couple of times on the radio as well. But really, she only had one song. Now, the Brit Awards eligibility, you need to have 2 top 20 hits throughout the period of time that you're allowed to have them in. Or you've got to have one album that is in the top 20. So I wondered then if Kat Burns didn't really fit that. I don't know for sure, but that was my assumption there. So if they're the only kind of female names that are cropping up and half of them aren't British anyway, then it begs the question what we're going to do in terms of the Brit Award category for Artist of the Year. So then it comes down to, okay, well, the music industry might have a name for being male-centric. And I know that this is a lot more apparent when we look at, for example, directors, and we're looking at like Oscars and Golden Globes. There's a terrific skew towards men there. But then I think of theatre, and I think there's still some skew in gender there. But like for costume designer, female skewed, for more obvious reasons there. Now, my belief is not that we should have to bring in a gendered category. I took this back to the idea of schools. Your GCSEs are given a grade boundary every year. For every exam, it always changes, right? There's no like specific threshold. BTEC maybe, but GCSEs wise, we have a normal curve that we have to satisfy, and only a certain percentage will be given 9s, 8s, 7s, 6s. And if you didn't know, that's the new grading system. A's, B's and C's have gone. But a certain percentage of kids can only get that. It's not like if you get 80, you're going to get an A star or an equivalent of a 9 or 8. Like, there's only a certain amount of people that are allowed to get that, because it changes based on how difficult the test is. Now, some of you would argue with me that that is more objective. There's no problem with doing it because it's a test. They're all sitting the same test and it's fair. But I hate to break it to you, but it's not. It's not fair because, yes, whilst that point might be fair, we've got to look at the system behind it. And technically, schools are skewed towards girls. Schools are set up in a way that supports girls' behaviour, the way that girls generally tend to stick to the rules, that follow instruction and will achieve more than boys. Every GCSE results, every single year, on average, girls outperform boys since the year 2000. And schools might know about this. Schools should be aware of this. And often we do talk about boys. They can be at either end as well. And of course, there are going to be boys that are high achieving and there's going to be girls that are lower achieving. The point is, though, still not equality. Whilst the outcome is not the same, no one's screaming their heads off about it. No one's asking for schools to significantly change to support boys. And if we're going to take this view, we've got to look at all these systems and why this is happening. Now, with schools, it's unfortunate because I think there's more that we can do for boys and to support them, because they, as a teacher's been in the classroom, like they don't sit as easily in a seat for 45 minutes to an hour. And they are more practical. How many of them are playing football on the playground at lunchtime compared to the girl? They've got a lot more physical energy. Now, when it comes to the Brits, this is interesting to try and look at the system. So, one, I don't think it's an issue because it's not a clear pattern yet exists in the 21st century of this genderless category. But I'm happy to accept that maybe there will be a pattern and we need to keep an eye. That's where I'm at with this whole thing. But if we then go back and look at the system, I want to try and understand what's happening. And I'm not sure I have an answer, but I've got some ideas around it. So, first off, the top charts didn't have that many women in it. Okay, so then what are the listening habits of men and women? Like, is it that more men listen to men and more women listen to women, and maybe then more men listen to music and therefore there's there? I was making a lot of trajectories, a lot of theories, throwing them out there to try and see what I felt was going on. So when I then looked at this, women do tend to listen to more female artists than men, but they still don't listen to a majority of female. So on Spotify, female listeners will stream 30.5% from female or mixed gender artists, whereas male listeners will stream 17.2% from female or mixed gender artists. So female listeners will listen to more female and mixed gender artists than men, but overall, they are still listening, both of them, to a majority of male music. And I think this is important to understand. We, as the population, are listening to more male music. As a business, which is what music is, it is an industry designed to make money. As an industry, if you are given the option between a male and a female artist, there's going to be an element of how much money can we make from this person? And if we're finding that in even the best case scenario, 70% of listening is going towards male artist music because we are listening to it as the consumer, then there's going to end up being a focus on that. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take opportunities away from women, because there's obviously 30% of people that are enjoying that on a good basis, 30%. However, we can't deny the listening habits of us. Now, I also want to be transparent about that. Maybe the algorithms on Spotify are causing issues, you could say, because if the algorithm thinks that you like male music, then it's going to keep giving you male music. And so maybe the algorithm is sexist in some way. Well, I had a little look at some other references here. Now, there's a statement here that suggests that instead of categorising it by what females listen to and males listen to, when you group it all together, you get about 22.6 with streaming female. So 20, just over 20%. So that means that just under 80% is from male artists. 22.6% is from female and mixed gender artists. If people are choosing their own music, that percentage is about the same, 22.5%. It's worse by 0.1%. And people aren't being encouraged by an algorithm to choose stuff. When they're given their personalised Discover Weekly playlists, they end up streaming 18.1% from female artists. So 4.4% worse than when they choose it themselves. So the Discover Weekly algorithm is a little bit of a problem. And why is it happening? Because it's pushing what you want. And obviously, if you want more male, then it's going to keep increasing that male. So we've got to be aware of that and be careful of that. When listeners play Spotify editorial playlists, so it sounds like it's not so algorithm based, but it's put together by a team maybe, they end up streaming 24% from female artists, so 1.5% better. So there might be a little bit of a skew because of the algorithms, but it doesn't deny the fact that we, even before the algorithms, choosing music for ourselves, will only select 22.5% of female artists on average. So that means that there is a popularity towards male music. Now, why is that? Is it because there's more male artists out there? It's a very extended rabbit hole to try and really understand what's going on. But to say that no women were there and it's sexist, to me is just incorrect. We've got to balance this and understand that, okay, well, hang on, we're listening to more music by male artists. We're choosing to do that. The biggest thing we can do to change that is start listening to more female artists, in particular, female British artists. Like, I know you guys have had Taylor Swift, because I can tell you now, I can see what you guys listen to. As a collective, I can go onto Spotify for podcasts, as how I see all of my stats, and I can see what you guys listen to in the majority. And from what I remember, it was pretty female heavy. Let me check again. So you guys have been listening to Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Rihanna, Ed Sheeran, and Miley Cyrus as your top artists. A great number of females, 4 out of 5. So people listening to this podcast generally listening to females. Lo and behold, they are all American artists. Other than Ed Sheeran, who is the male Brit, we haven't got another Brit and we haven't got another female. Bearing in mind that the predominance of my audience is from the United... You guys are Brits. You guys are going to be the most interested in British music, if anyone is at all, and you're going to be the ones that help push it forwards. So then we have to look at this and go, is it a problem of what the Brits have selected? Or is it a problem of what we listen to? And do we really want to change our preferences just to make a category even in the outcomes of it? I've already told you I love to death. I can't tell you how many times I've replayed that Maisie Peters album, and you would have seen my Spotify Wrapped. It was those 3 artists, I think, that took up the top 4, if not all 5 spaces. It's terrible, really. That's how obsessed I get with that. People might say to me, well, you're not a feminist if you're not fighting for feminist rights. I fight for equality. That's where I sit. And I don't like screaming and shouting about where women might have been outdone without fully knowing what's going on. I don't just look at the peak level of the tip of the iceberg and say, oh my God, what a problem for women. I go, well, hang on, there's all of this under here. If men are being prioritised and favoritised, how is it happening? When I'm looking at the chart, I don't think it's unreasonable that there are no women, no British female artists nominated for Best Artist of the Year. I can't see it. I don't know who would fill that gap and even be on that level. Don't understand. And when I look, the charts are filled with men. And then I go, okay, why is that happening? Well, we're listening to more men. I don't want to give someone an award or a nomination that they don't deserve. That's like a participation award. And we know what effect that's had on people, on children, when you give them participation award. They can't take rejection. They can't deal with the fact that they're not there and they're not as good. And I don't just want to put some token gesture female in the position of a nomination to make sure that there's a female in there. I want that female to be celebrated and deserved when she hits the standard that meets the same as that. Coming back to the school analogy, we could give different grade boundaries to children. I told you before that the way that the school system works, it prioritises and favouritised females. So, okay, let's split them apart. And that one wouldn't help when we have non-binary pupils, but we've got this issue of, okay, well, the girls are going to get particular grades for certain subjects and the boys are going to get particular grade boundaries for certain subjects. Now, I think it's nearly in every subject except for maths and maybe some of the sciences, but maths is a really clear one. Boys outdo the girls in general. So only then will their 9s and 8s be stronger, because if you reduce it down, let's take, English, Spanish, drama, anything like that, the girls outdo the boys. So what you're going to say is, well, you guys can't have as many 9s. We can't have as many of you getting 9s because we've got to have the same amount of boys. So the ones of you that would have scraped a 9 before, you're going to drop down to an 8. Even though you've got a higher score than the boys who did the same test as you, the boys are going to get the grade 9, because we need to make sure we have an even amount of boys and girls. That's not right. Those girls have achieved just as much as those boys. And therefore, or in fact more than, if you've really skewed the grade boundary that way, and it should just all be muddled together. I don't want people walking around with awards, with certificates, saying that they're better than they are because we need to worry about this quota idea. I want people to get awards and to get certificates because of the same rough playing field that they had. If there is a generalised reason that boys are underperforming, then what are we doing underneath to help those boys move up to that standard? I don't want to make it just, let's make it a bit easier for them to get it. No. We have to adapt the way that we're working with those boys and make it something that they're able to learn from. This may sound like a really long rant, but I've tried to be balanced and understand other ideas. I'm trying to talk about an element that I feel is not really being shared so much. I do understand that there is an importance of valuing female artists, valuing their contributions. But I see that at the Brits in the Rising Star Awards. We're seeing raw talent, good talent. Griff was one of those nominees. She might have even won, but Griff was included in that. Adele won that equivalent award if it wasn't called that then. That's why we all started to know about Adele. She was doing fantastically well at a young age. And then, lo and behold, she's then got Artist of the Year down the line. What is it in the middle that we're not able to provide women? And why is it that as a population we don't listen to women as much? That's the question that I'd love someone to answer more for me. I think it's probably equal. I say that, but then we know my Spotify Wrapped was skewed female, so maybe it's not. Or maybe at least last year and the year before it's not, thanks to Taylor, Maisie and Griff. So I'm scratching my head going, okay, well, I'm one of the 30% of people, 20-odd% of people that does listen to female or mixed gender artists. But there's a big chunk of the world that isn't. And should we be trying to change everybody's minds, to change their preferences around music, just to make sure that there's a female representation there? Or do we need to accept that there's some great female artists coming through, but they're not Music Artist of the Year yet? I really hope that Maisie Peters or Griff get to make it to that point. And if you're listening, go check out their music. I mean, Maisie Peters' album got me through an entire section of boys in dating being a pain. Like, it was an empowering album, very poppy, wonderful, great to sing along to, got some great middle-aged sections. Go listen to it. But she's not Artist of the Year yet. Not by a long shot, but I adore her to pieces. And I'm allowed to do that. I can still celebrate her, still tag her and stuff, go and support her at her concerts, and maybe one day she'll be up there in the nominations. Who knows? But I don't want her getting an award, for example, just because I feel like a female should have been there. Even one that is more acclaimed in the way that they've had top 20s and top 30s this year. I still want females to meet that standard, but I want to understand why if they're not meeting it, and I don't just want us to fill gaps because if the men have done better this year, if we're listening to more male music this year, then so be it. And if we really want to change the pattern, then we have to change our own behaviour or encourage other people to as well. Share your songs on Spotify. If you want to support females in anything that they do, then you've got to talk about them, share them. And in the case of music, you need to listen to it. In the case of actual art, you have to buy it. In anything, you have to support, you have to encourage and do it, because the power actually, with 1,000 people on the panel, isn't just coming from those 1,000 people. They're coming from the patterns that they see. They're coming from what they understand about the industry. It's not down to 5 people that have got into a room and forgotten about all the women's that exist. 1,000 people negates that bias quite heavily. So why did they come to that conclusion that there was no one there? And if you think there really was someone that deserved it, drop me a DM, because I can't see it yet. I can't see who would have been a useful candidate to have put forward that met the rest. So sometimes it's not worth jumping on the bandwagon until we really understand what's going on. I'm happy to hear different opinions. Obviously, I've got my one. I'm quite clearly down this one in this sense. I have more questions than I have answers per se. But it's this idea around feminism isn't just about going, where are the women? It's going, why aren't there the women if they're there? And is it just one-off? I want to see Homeless Want next year to be here now, just to see what that Brit Award nomination list looks like next year. If it is all male, I'll go through the same process and I'll look at what's happening with the charts. Was there any significant female input there from British female artists? And then we need to look further. If that continues to happen, what's happening in terms of the marketing of females, what's happening in terms of the opportunities for females and the money that's being put in to support female artists to do well and to create good music. I'm not worried yet. I like discussions about this. I like to understand fully what's going on. And I hope that's giving you an insight and things to think about when you hear if something might be sexist in some way, is to question it as well, to make sure that it's not just straight away assumed that that's it. It's as clear cut as that. It needs investigation, it needs thought. And it's okay to take time to kind of be like, well, hang on a second, and to question it. Love to hear your thoughts. As ever, always drop me a DM on Instagram if you want to get in touch. A little bit of a different one, but it's important to discuss these topical issues now and to understand and allow you to make your own decision and balanced understanding of potentially what's going on, and not just read the tabloid headlines, which is what got my attention in the first place and would have caught many people's attention and sent them spiraling into an inequality tirade of comments and thoughts without really thinking about it. We're not all experts on everything. We can only get hold of certain data and information that we can. But from what I can see, it comes down to our habits as being the biggest problem, our listening habits individually, and making sure that if we want to support female artists and get that equality, then we're going to need to listen to them. British female artists. What I'd like to know, actually, one last thing. If you have any great British female artists that I don't know about, then drop me a DM to share, and I will share some more. And maybe, slowly but surely, we'll all find some different British artists that we can at least listen to. And even if they don't win any big awards, at least we will be supporting them in a particular way that is helpful to that. Until next time, everybody, keep celebrating your single girl life together.